Okay. Good day, everyone. Great to see so many of you joining already. Look, we'll give people another, 30 seconds or so before we kick things off. But while we're waiting, just doing a honest gut check that'll tie into what we'll cover today. For the finance teams here. So if managers in your organization, say, needed to check their spend versus budget this morning, would they be able to do that without asking you or someone on your team? I should probably have said it, but there should be a little chat box there if you did want to give me an answer to that. I can see some coming through. That's good. Okay. Look, I think we're at the point where we should kick things off here. So look, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So just a little bit of some quick housekeeping before we kick off. So first, make sure your sound is turned on. If you can't hear what I'm saying, typically what helps is just clicking on the image of me and the slides here, and it should turn the audio back on. Now, for you guys in the audience, obviously your audio and video is disabled, so there's no worries there about randomly popping up on screen or anyone hearing what's going on in the background. If things are running a bit slow, if I'm lagging or things are just taking a bit of time to load, typically the best way to solve it, close out a few apps that are running in the background, X out some of those tabs in your browser, and that tends to help quite a bit. And lastly, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A box as we go through the webinar today. So if there's anything I'm talking about that you have some follow-up questions on, or you want to know how it would work in your scenario, drop it in the Q&A and we'll tackle that towards the end of the webinar. Now, let's talk about FY26. So if you're part of a business where managing performance across departments, programs, regions, or business units is critical, you probably already know that tracking categories can be helpful, but also limited. Most teams start using tracking categories because they want better visibility. But when you want to go deeper, so say, for example, compare metrics or data across divisions, forecast and budget at that level, and restrict access to certain data for certain individuals, or just tailor some reporting, it all starts to fall apart. And that's what this session today is about, how Fathom helps you do more with your tracking categories. Now, I know that not everyone here today is working with, say, like 100+ tracking categories, because most teams that I speak with probably have in the range of between 10 and 50. And they just want a clear way to group them, report on them, and forecast or budget across them without having to rebuild everything in Excel every single month. So even if you just got one key area where tracking categories matter, you'll probably find something useful today. Now, just as a quick introduction, I'm Stian. I am part of the customer engagement team here at Fathom. And most of my time is really spent speaking with finance teams across all kinds of industries, whether it's multi-entity retail groups, service businesses, or not-for-profits, who are just simply trying to build clearer, more useful reporting and forecasting processes. And that's what we're here to talk about, how Fathom helps bring more efficiency and structure to your reporting, reduce the headaches around forecasting and budgeting, and simply make your numbers easier to share and act on across the business. So here's what we'll run through today. So we're going to start off with some of those common challenges that we see with tracking category-based processes, why those challenges tend to repeat regardless of what industry you're in, what changes when you add a tool like Fathom into the mix. Then we're going to do a demo to try and bring this all to life. And finally, we're going to wrap things up with a Q&A. So just to set the scene a little bit. Now, I was working with a non-for-profit not that long ago that had around 25 programs, each tracked as a tracking category option in Xero. And on the surface, it seemed fine. But every month, their team would spend roughly 5 days simply just stitching together data and reports in Excel. They were trying to deliver useful reports to each program manager and the leadership team, but the data just wasn't structured for it. So it took days to get something that was semi-tailored. And even then, most of the managers weren't confident using it, or even worse, they never even opened the reports. Now, what turned things around for them was applying what we'll cover today, which is Fathom's standalone method for tracking categories, which involves setting up each program as its own entity in Fathom. And suddenly they were able to build tailored, visual, and automated reports and dashboards, give restricted access, and compare program performance with just a few clicks. Now, once that setup was done, and they had been running it for a few months, one of the leads actually told me on a call that they finally had a setup that was matching the way they were actually running the business. Now, you see, as we head into FY26, here's what's kind of coming up again and again and again in the conversations that my team is having. Teams still spend way too many hours and days manually rebuilding things like dashboards, reports, and forecasts. Managers are being asked to own their numbers, but a lot of the time don't have clear access to it. Forecasting is becoming more and more important, but a lot of the time it's still too high level. And lastly, most of the time spreadsheets can't really support the level of governance or collaboration that's required in a modern business. Most teams use tracking categories. They will hit these same issues basically at some point, really regardless of their industry. Now, Xero, MyHub, QuickBooks, they all support tracking categories, jobs, divisions. The terminology changes basically depending on what system you're using. But when you need to forecast or budget per department, limit visibility by role or region, group functions across multiple entities, or just create segmented groups of tracking categories within a single entity, or create reports that helps bridge that gap between the finance language and operation language, you end up back in the spreadsheets. One CFO that I actually spoke to recently, I found put it quite perfectly. The data is all there. We just don't have a way to present it properly at the right level, at the right time, to the right people. And that's exactly the gap that this standalone method we'll be talking about today fills. So what changes when you apply something like Fathom? So when teams shift to using Fathom, here's what they tell us change. So a lot of the time, the department heads finally understand and actually utilize their reports. Forecasts and budgets become more realistic because they're no longer just top-down estimates. Finance stops being this bottleneck of information, and access becomes structured because you can share what matters and hide what doesn't. Another customer that I've helped implemented this setup summed it up like this, and honestly, I really love this quote. Instead of chasing managers for inputs, they started chasing us for guidance, and that's what good visibility creates. So this is where Fathom comes in. And for the ones here today that aren't familiar with what Fathom does, well, it's a platform for business performance reporting, forecasting, and analysis designed to help finance teams move past surface level visibility. We built it with real world use in mind, especially for you guys that are juggling multiple entities, departments, locations, or business units. Now, Fathom connects directly to your accounting system, your Xero, your MyHub, your QuickBooks, and it pulls in and refreshes your data automatically. From there, it then allows you to build out reports, set up forecasts, compare across groups, and tailor the experience for different teams, all without needing to copy-paste the data each and every month. So let's get into the heart of today's session, this standalone method. And here's what it looks like in practice. You set up each tracking category option, like a region, a department, or a cost center, as its own entity in Fathom. You can then forecast or budget at that level, as well as roll it up. You can group similar functions across entities, like, for example, sales or admin. You set permissions so that, for example, managers only see what they need. And you can tweak the report language and format so it reflects how each part of the business actually speaks. Whether you really got 5 tracking categories or 250, this gives you that flexibility and structure to segment, report, and plan properly. And importantly, this isn't some kind of hack or a workaround. This is actually how some of the most advanced users of Fathom have set themselves up. So let's take a look at what this looks like inside Fathom. I'll try and walk you guys through the setup, the reporting and forecasting using this standalone method, and then we'll come back to this and wrap things up and take your questions. So let's see if I can get myself off the screen here. Perfect. So now that we're inside Fathom, I am wanting to show you a better way to manage department level forecasting, budgeting, and reporting without those messy spreadsheets or that kind of endless back and forth. So we're going to look at how we can manage these things like the budgets, the forecast, the reports by department right inside Fathom. Now, some of you might be trying to get better inputs from department heads. Others may want to give department heads, leadership, or managers scoped access to their data so that they can track and take ownership of their side of the business. Either way, Fathom's divisional features that we'll be showcasing here today will help you get granular and collaborate without that fear of losing control. Now, in order for me to showcase anything of what we'll be talking about today, the first step to unlock this is to actually go and import our tracking categories, our cost centers, departments, locations, branches from Xero, MyHub, or QuickBooks directly into Fathom as what we call a standalone entity. And the way that I do this is that I first go ahead and import the legal entities. So I've imported two legal entities here, AuroraSoft and Viridium Solutions. And once I have that, I can go back to the Add button, select Company, select the source, and I can click this little blue line of text here, Import a single tracking category option. From here, I can then select which company I want to import those tracking categories from. And Fathom will then give me a list of the available tracking categories for me to import. Now you can see here that I've already gone ahead and imported a few of them here, hence why they're grayed out. But I could say choose the two remaining locations here, click Next, and Fathom would import those for me as standalone entities. So depending on how many of these tracking categories you're trying to import, that process might look like a minute or two. But what really happens is that Fathom establishes a connection between, say, Xero and Fathom to allow us to pull in that tracking category data on a daily basis. So every 24 hours, Fathom will do an automatic update of that data. Now, if, for example, it was 12 p.m. on a Friday and we needed to see some updated results and we couldn't wait until the next day, well, then we also do have a bulk update feature here, which would allow me to, either update or manually update every single entity and department on my account, or just choose a specific one to update. Now, one other thing that I've done here, which we're not going to go through too much today, is just consolidating some of these entities and departments together. Now, we do have some great resources available in our help center around how consolidations in Fathom works, and you're more than happy to ask a question about it in the Q&A as well, and we can see if we have some time to go through it then. But basically what I've done here is something that this import of tracking category as standalone entities allows me to do, which is take these departments and consolidate them in different ways. So for example, I've created a consolidated group here, which I've called Operation Departments Consolidated, which is essentially a consolidation of the AuroraSoft Operation Department and the Viridium Solutions Operations Department. And I'm creating this group so that I can give a head of operations, for example, a unified view of the departments that they manage, but also that sort of entity by, or should I say, department by department view, all in the same report. Another group that I've created here is basically just grouping together all of the departments for one of my legal entities. And this is what's going to allow me to, say, get each head of, say, finance, HR, operations, and sales to go in, do their own budget or have an input on their own budget, and then allow me to kind of aggregate that all together to create the entity or company budget as well. Lastly, I've also created here a benchmarking group, which would allow me that if this was, for example, a number of branches or locations, to actually have a benchmarking view of how each of these locations, for example, would be performing against one another. So with that out of the way, once the actual setup has been done here and all the files have been imported, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and invite some of my leadership and my managers into the account to give them that specific access to their side of the business. And I do that by simply going to the cogwheel in the top right corner here, select user management, and click invite a person. And I'm going to invite here Jack Smith. Like I said, maybe we'll pretend that Jack here is the head of operations. Let's see, we'll just give him a fictive email here. And if I wanted to, I could give him a bit of a welcome note, but I think I'm going to skip that step for now. Now, the next thing Fathom will ask me is, okay, well, what sort of access should Jack have at a sort of a high level? Is he going to be someone who primarily views, edits, or is he going to be someone who should have access to everything across the account? Now, in my case here, Jack is primarily going to be a viewer, but I do want him to have some editing access as well, specifically around sort of the forecast and the budget. However, I'm going to say that he's primarily a viewer. And the reason why I'm doing this is because in this next step here, I can get a lot more granular with essentially the user access that I can give to Jack. So for example, while a viewer typically wouldn't have access to setup, in Jack's case here, I want to give him access to update his financials and non-financials whenever he wants to, but I don't want him to have access to, say, reclassify accounts in the chart of accounts or edit or change his targets for some of the KPIs. I'm going to give him full access to all of the analysis tools in the dashboard for him. And again, if Jack here was a branch manager, for example, and one of the tracking categories I was importing was a branch, I might give him access to benchmarking as well, so that he can actually go in and compare himself to the other branches and his peers. From a reporting perspective, I will, in the first instance here, give Jack only access to view published reports that I've created for him. Now, in time, one of my goals is for Jack to actually have the ability to go and create his own reports. But as a starting point and to make the transition a bit easier, I just wanted to have access to view those published reports. Now, lastly, from a forecasting perspective, I want him to be able to view and edit. Now, the last step here is just essentially telling Fathom which areas and which entities and departments Jack should have access to. So I'm going to give him access to the 2 operation departments, as well as that consolidated operation department group that I've created. From there, all that's left to do is just to send him that invite, and Jack will get an email in his inbox telling him how he can now log into Fathom to view and start actually using the tool. So now let's say that I am Jack here, right? And I've been invited into Fathom and I've already sort of had a little bit of say in the budget, and it's actually almost completed, but there's one last change that I have to do. So in a recent leadership meeting, it was agreed that instead of increasing engineering salaries by 4%, we're actually going to be increasing them by 5%. So Jack now needs to go into the operations budget and make that change. So what Jack is doing is going to the AuroraSoft operations department here and jumping into the forecast. And right away, you can see that it's made pretty clean for him. So every kind of line here with the 0 is not something Jack has to worry about. He only needs to worry about the 2 headings here, operation cost of sales and operation expenses. In the operation expenses, there's engineering salaries, and Jack basically just goes and clicks the first cell for where he's trying to forecast from. And we can see that already. Yeah, it's set up so that the salaries are increasing by 4% from the actuals from last year. So Jack now goes and clicks new rule. He selects link to previous period using actuals from last year, but setting that increase to 5% rather than 4%. Now, also for both Jack and any other person that's going to have an interest in this budget, we want Jack to actually input some notes, some justifications or assumptions as to why this change was made, so that there is an easy log for us to go and see why was this change made in the forecast. So let's say as of 28th of May, leadership agreed to raise salaries for ENG by 5%. And he could write out sort of any justification that he wants, and then he includes that in the assumptions report by just clicking on this little box here, and then we can create that rule. Now the actual budget is completed from Jack's perspective. So in order for him to kind of now hand it over to finance and kind of say that, my work here is done, what he does is he jumps to the settings of this department, and he simply does a quick update from forecast. So a lot of information has already been stored through that forecast for previous years, but Jack can now simply go in and click Save as Budget to then get his new amendments added to that budget file. Lastly, what Jack can also now do is he can go into the report section of his department, where he'll find a budget assumptions report that's been created, and he can take that report, set it to publish, to essentially say that his work has been done. Now, this would allow Fathom to send out a notification to anyone who has an interest in viewing Jack's budget to jump into this budget assumptions report, where firstly, they will see a breakdown of the actual budgeted numbers as well as what it totals to. And they'll be able to see here a lot of the assumptions and justifications that's been put in place as to why the budget looks the way it looks. As someone who's coming in and viewing this budget and viewing this assumptions report, there is also that ability for another stakeholder to go and leave some comments directly, for example, to the budget numbers here, or to leave some comments around the assumptions, so that we can kind of collaborate directly in this report about some changes that's been done. Now, lastly, because Jack also took his budget and saved it as the budget file for his department, this would now allow the finance team to go and say, okay, well, Jack was the last person to kind of tick off his budget. Finance, HR, and sales and marketing has already done it. So now what finance can do is simply jump into this consolidated group that's made up of the 4 departments, run a forecast for that group, say that they want to start by just linking existing budgets. So essentially just taking information from those budgets that we made at the department level, click through the steps to just ensure that everything has been set up correctly, from how accounts are linked together on a P&L and balance sheet, etc. But what he basically gets is an aggregated result of all of the underlying budgets flowing up to this sort of entity view. And from here, we could then use this budget to do variance analysis on an entity level. We can export it out to CSV. We can push it back into 0 for the budget side there. So this has made that job a lot easier, because Fathom has essentially done all the aggregation work for the finance team. Now, let's pretend that we're a few months later and we're getting to the end of the year. Now, Jack gets a ping in his email from finance that an annual report for his consolidated operations departments has been generated. So his ops team that span both AuroraSoft and Viridium Solutions have been grouped together, and he can go and he can view a report for that. So Jack basically just jumps into the published report section of the consolidated group here, where he'll find the operation department's annual report. He can then jump in and immediately get a report that's specifically tailored to him and his side of the business and the information that he cares about. So for example, looking at some executive summary where average monthly spend, total financial year spend, what percentage of expenses the operation departments sits as a percentage of total spend, and what that target benchmark has been internally, along with some commentary from the finance team. He'll also be able to go into some monthly trends to see how that total spend has looked like over time. and a breakdown of spend compared to last year across all the different categories with a variance to how they looked like last year. And lastly, also an entity breakdown or a department breakdown so that you can see basically from which entity these amounts are coming from. And lastly, finance is also included a summary and some focus areas for the next financial year, all ready to go for Jack. Now, Jack can view this in the tool, which will give him a few sort of interactive abilities like looking at the chart and hovering over it to see some of the data points. But if you wanted it to just be in a PDF format, you could just click the little button in the bottom left corner here, and Fathom would download the PDF report for him with this exact layout. Now, let's put Jack to the side for a bit. So let's bring in Jenny instead. And Jenny actually heads up the sales and marketing team. Now, similar to Jack, she doesn't need access to all the company data. She only needs access to her team's performance metrics, how, for example, her P&L looks or how her budget looks. So she will only have access to one department in Fathom, say this Aurora Soft sales and marketing one. On a monthly basis, Finance has set up a recurring report that gets generated for Sarah that, again, is specific to her side of the business. Now, this might look like, for example, some KPIs more in line with the sales and marketing side of the business, such as closed revenue for the month, pipeline coverage for the next 90 days, lead to customer conversion rate, CPL, CAC, and marketing and sales spend as a percentage of revenue. Now, similarly, they've included some funnel and conversion performance for her to look at, as well as some spend efficiency and priorities going into next month. And this is something that essentially gets automated for Jenny so that finance team doesn't have to spend heaps of time building these reports out for her, and simultaneously, she doesn't have to go and chase finance. If she wanted to, and she wanted to run this report for, say, halfway through the month, she would have the ability to essentially just go and use this report to create a similar version for, say, a month to date in the middle of June. Now, lastly, so again, let's say that Jenny wasn't actually leading a department, but a branch or a storefront that was set up as a tracking category in Xero. In that case, we might also want to give her access to, for example, this benchmarking group, where she can jump in at any point through the year or the month or the quarter and actually look at how she's performing compared to her peers. And she can jump into this benchmarking group, look at a wide range of different metrics from revenue, gross profit, down to profitability ratio, etc., to actually see how she's stacking up. And in this view, if I was Jenny, the only actual storefront that I'd be able to verify and see the name of would be my own. The rest would just be anonymized. Now, if she knows that one of the other departments is, a really good one and someone that she wants to kind of get some learnings from or see what they're doing to try and increase her own performance, she would also have a ranking tool here, which would allow her to choose her own storefront, compare it to one of the other storefronts, and see how she ranks up across a wide range of different metrics. And this is really how Fathom handles divisional budgeting, forecasting, and reporting. So it gives people like Jack and Jenny the tools they need to own their numbers while finance stays in control and keeps that oversight. It's clean structure, it's real-time collaboration, and a lot of the time it leads to better decisions a lot faster. Okay, let's see if I can get my camera back. Like so, perfect. Thanks for sticking around, guys. So look, just to kind of summarize as well, if you are working with tracking categories and you're still spending hours in spreadsheets, hopefully this showed you what's possible when you take a bit of a different approach. The standalone method has helped businesses across a wide range of industries: retail, hospitality, not-for-profit, professional services, move from manual work to more structured and scalable insight. Now, let me see if I can get my last slide there. So look, if you're new to Fathom, you can test all this out with a 14-day trial. You can just head to fathom.com, click the big green start a trial button, and off you go. If you're already using Fathom, but want to explore how to restructure around this method, well, reach out and would love to help. And I'm trying something new today. So you can see a giant QR code on the screen right now. So if you wanted to have a chat about this, have a look at what this would look like with your own setup, scan that QR code, and you can book in a chat with someone on my team to look at how this would work for your unique setup. So with that out of the way, I can see that a lot of people have been asking questions. So I'll see if I can get to all of them. But let's see here. So just to try and cover some of these off, there we go. So if you do a consolidation, can you then drill through variances to see which company is the issue? 100%. So you might have seen in that consolidated report that we made for Jack that a certain section of that was actually breaking down each department's performance so that it can compare department to department and spot those issues as well. Another question was wanting to do cash flow for job items from MyUp. Is that possible? Yeah, 100%. So you saw how we created a budget there, essentially for Jack's operation department. Now, because that tool is actually the same tool that's used for cash flow forecasting in Fathom, you would be able to do that kind of whole cash flow forecasting work for a specific job. If you're talking about more around, should I say like the reporting side, then yes, that would also be possible. I got a question whether or not this was the pro version that we talked about today or the other one. The other one, I'm presuming you're meaning portfolio. All we did today was inside the pro version of Fathom. Now, also a question, how does inviting users to view, edit, admin change the Fathom cost? It doesn't. So Fathom does not charge based on users or seats or anything like that, which means you can invite as many people as you want. You can give them whatever access level you want, and it's not going to have an impact on the cost. How did you get the budget assumptions to display? So if you're talking about in the report itself, I see if I can get that going. But it's essentially just a component that you can add to your report as long as there has been some assumptions made when the forecast or budget was set up. So see if I can share my screen here and try and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Apologies if this is taking a little bit longer than anticipated. There we go. So if I just wanted to add that assumptions, all I really have to do is, for example, if I click here on add tables and financials, there's this little search icon here where if I just search assumptions, you can see those assumptions tables there ready to be included. Now for this company, I don't have a forecast, so you can see that it wouldn't be able for me to put that in. Are we going to receive a recording? Yes, you are, 100%. So there will be a recording sent out after this as well. Now, can you change some of the main P&L headings instead of net profit at the bottom? You wanted to say net profit and loss? Yeah, definitely. So within Fathom, you do have the ability to put something that we call custom terminology on a specific company. So I'm going to just go into the top right corner here, into organization settings. And you can see that there's a tab here called terminology. Now, this allows me to essentially create custom terminology. So for example, if I needed to, wherever say revenue is mentioned in Fathom, we want it to be called something else, or to your point, if, let's see if I had net income, we wanted that to be, what was it you said? I think you said net profit / loss. Then we can just add it like this. So we can basically just tailor that terminology and then apply that terminology to a specific entity or a specific department. Does Fathom offer in-person workshops for groups or individuals? Yeah, we do. So I'll see if I can get, I'm gonna have to take that share away, I think. Let's see if I can get my slides back up here. So if you wanted to have a chat, a workshop to look at this more in detail, scan this QR code and you can book in a chat directly through there. Alternatively, we will be sending you an email as well after this with the recording, so you can reply to that and we can look at scheduling a time. Can you restrict a user to an individual report rather than all published reports? So good question. Not necessarily. So you can either give them access to all reports for that specific entity, department, or restrict their access through basically two kind of separate libraries, draft reports and published reports, which tends to kind of solve that issue of giving people access to too many reports as well. If I use 0 and the category tracking was incorrectly assigned in 0, is it possible to change it in Fathom, and will it replicate the changes in 0? That's a bit of a tricky one. But one thing I can tell you is Fathom never automatically pushes anything back into 0. There are a couple of things where we can make it easier to get data from Fathom into 0. So for example, if you create a budget in Fathom, you can download it directly into, say, a 0 import format. So it's basically just jumping into 0 and adding it without having to redo any formatting. But Fathom won't necessarily be able to override any data from 0, for example. It's all a one-way data flow. So you guys have been asking a lot of questions, which is great, by the way. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them today. Will department be considered a company? Do you pay a subscription per department? So yeah, this is a great one. So Fathom, yes, it is based, Fathom subscription cost is based on the number of entities. And this workaround, like this, I shouldn't call it, because it is not a workaround, but this additional advanced feature of Fathom to actually allow you to bring in tracking categories does come with an increase in your subscription. However, because it is departments, we don't charge the same rate that we do for an entity. It's heavily discounted. Now, that price is definitely something we can chat about, but it typically sort of ranges between 15 to $5, depending on how many tracking categories you have and how many you actually need to import into the system. So I have a problem when the tracking category is blank. How can Fathom notify me if there's a blank category that I need to look into? So good question. If it is kind of well, it depends, right? Because when you present tracking categories in Fathom, you essentially, like we talked about today, you choose what tracking categories you want to pull into Fathom. So if you have a tracking category that is blank and you pulled it into Fathom, you would be able to immediately see that it is blank, right? Like if you tried to then say, look at analysis or run a report for, say, June, but there was no data, the system would flag that there is no data. It couldn't calculate KPIs. It wouldn't be able to actually do anything with that file because there is no data. Similarly, if you then presented it in a consolidated group with tracking categories side by side, you'd see that all of the other tracking categories would have data from a P&L perspective, but your blank category wouldn't. I'll cover one last question before we wrap this up, which was, if you make changes at the consolidated level, how does that flow down to the divisional entities? That's a good question. It doesn't work in that regard, right? So it's the other way. It's the bottom-up approach that works really well with what we talked about here today. So say building out budgets on a tracking category, like a division by division level, and rolling it up, rather than setting a top-down budget and then kind of setting some assumptions of how that rolls down to the departments. So bottom up is definitely a lot more easy to set up in Fathom with what we covered today. Okay, look, I realized there was probably a few questions that I didn't get to, but no worries. I will definitely try and collate all of these and send out some responses to the people that I didn't have a chance to do this live with. But look, once again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I hope this was an informative webinar and you learned something new about how Fathom can handle tracking categories. And again, if it's something that you want to explore further, feel free to get in touch with us. Feel free to sign up for a trial and test this out yourself. And yeah, we'll see you here for the next webinar. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.